Okay. Well, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome to the Netherlands.
Thank you so much.
Is this your first time here?
It is not my first time here.
No?
No.
Been here many times?
I've been to the Netherlands quite a few times, although I've not been outside of Amsterdam more than a couple of times.
All right.
I've been to Utrecht twice now, though.
Okay.
In 2017, I was a guest of the Dutch Comic Con.
All right.
Elizabeth and I both were.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you and Elizabeth are together?
We are a couple, yes.
Oh, that's nice.
We're partners,
Oh, very
so to
nice.
speak.
Yeah.
Not business partners, though.
No. And,
Although it's lovely when we get to work together.
yeah, well, it's fun. So you can travel together.
That is
here.
true. Yes.
So how do you enjoy this con so far?
It's lovely. In my experience, the Dutch are very friendly and very kind, polite people. Food is excellent.
Yeah.
There are much fewer additives and strange chemicals in it
Yeah, especially.
than in my home country.
Yeah.
So I can eat more places. At home, I buy my food from the farmer's market, so I know what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Not everything, but a lot of it. The proteins, the vegetables.
That's nice.
Yeah,
So let's talk about your career.
it sounds good. That sounds good.
That's,
Not about food.
Not about. Well, we can talk about food as well.
I mean,
if you
whatever.
want. If you want, you know, I'm very
I mean, I love
flexible.
food. I love to cook.
Yeah. What's your favorite Dutch dish that you've tried? We are not well known for.
You know,
cuisine.
I haven't had a ton of inherently Dutch dishes.
No.
In all honesty, what I've eaten here has been, like Elizabeth and I, for instance, in Amsterdam, we found a restaurant called Kenna that was specializing in West African tasting menu that's in a fine dining setting,
Yeah.
which we'd never seen anywhere before,
Okay. Yeah.
which is quite unusual.
Yeah.
And then we had another meal at a place called Bak,
Okay.
B-A-K, and that was also lovely, supposedly with Dutch leanings, but mainly it was about what was local and what was fresh.
All right. Have you tried bitterballen?
I've seen bitterballen. I have tried your croquettes, which,
Yes.
no offense, but I might prefer the Spanish version of the croquettes.
It's okay.
But, you know,
Yeah, no. It's
but I love your continental breakfast. It's excellent.
okay. And stroopwafels?
I've had stroopwafels,
Okay.
of course.
Well, that's.
Honestly, I found an interesting version of that in Amsterdam that I'd never seen before, where it wasn't, it didn't have the texture. It was
Okay.
flat and bigger.
All right.
And it might have been called something else. It's supposedly a version of a stroopwafel, but thinner, more delicate, and less sweet.
Oh,
Like it had the filling between,
Yeah.
but it wasn't quite as crazily sweet as most stroopwafels I've had.
okay. I don't know.
But I haven't had. I see pancakes are everywhere too. I've got to try the pancakes.
Yeah, the poffertjes.
Yes.
Small ones.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk. Let's
Good talk. All right. Well, what?
Yeah. So, tell me, how did you get into voice acting? Was there a moment where you were like, "This is what I meant to do"?
No, not at all. I've been an actor since I was a child, on theater stages initially, but then when I think I was about 10 years old, when I was in a film called True Stories, which was David Byrne, the lead singer of the Talking Heads. He made a film in Texas when I was a child, and I was born and raised there. My father's from Chile, from Punta Arenas, Chile, the very bottom of South America.
Okay.
But my mother's from upstate New York State in the States, and they met in the middle a little bit. So my first foray into film was at about 10 years old, and I sang on the soundtrack and got to work with David Byrne for a couple of days. And then not until I'd say about 25 years ago, after doing a lot of independent film and a lot of theater primarily, and also singing in a lot of bands, I was at a birthday party at a bar in Austin, Texas called the Club de Ville. And I shut down the bar with this gentleman who happened to be a director for anime for a company called ADV Films.
Yeah.
And he happened to have seen me on stage. He'd seen me in a couple of movies. And he's like, "I know you're a decent actor. You ever done anime dubbing?" And I said, "No, I didn't even know what that was." He's like, "Have you watched any anime?" And I'm like, "You mean Japanimation?" And that's how old I am. And he said, "Yes." He's like, "Do you like any of that?" I said, "I love Akira," or we called it Akira in those days before we knew how to pronounce Japanese things. And he said, "Well, why don't you come in Monday? I've got this show called The Get Backers. There's a part, one of the leads, I think you'd be great for. Let's try you out on Monday." And so I went in, and did basically the whole contract in about half the time required because of my theatrical experience. The scripts we used in those days were paper scripts, so it was advantageous to be able to memorize lines.
Yeah.
And because I'd worked for devised theater companies that make their own work,
Yeah.
where we changed the script based upon the experiment of the day, I was able to memorize lines rather quickly. So the fact that I could memorize a page of dialogue made me pretty fast at the dubbing process.
Yeah.
So it continued after that.
Yes, and then you've done a lot of roles.
Yes.
Yes. Which one was the most challenging for you?
I mean, there's different ways that things can be challenging, obviously. In terms of the physical, like the effect on my voice, I've had a couple of experiences that were more challenging than others. Probably mainly because of what was required in terms of both the time commitment and the lengths I had to push myself to, the extremity involved. So one would be Finian for Black Butler, which is very much in the highest end of my range.
Okay.
To sustain that for, a 4 to 6 hour chunk of recording gets a bit painful.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is my first session where I was voicing Bane in the game DC Universe, the Batman villain. He was at the deepest end of my register and screaming a lot. That also killed my voice. So in terms of a physical challenge, those two would be the most challenging. Emotionally speaking, there have been a number that have been challenging for different reasons. But I enjoy that kind of challenge, I think, a bit more than the physical challenge, if that makes any sense.
So how do you prepare yourself for a role that's emotionally complicated?
Honestly, I feel like my life has prepared me for that. I have some deep-seated childhood trauma that, frankly, I try to use as an advantage. My mother gave full custody of me up when I was 3. I have a relationship with my mother, but my mother had other ideas, and she and my father divorced pretty quickly once they married, and she left the state. And my father, who was a pretty intensely tempered, mad Chilean, as I put it, was left in charge. And luckily he did that, but he was, he raised me kind of in a way that he was raised. And a Latin American father is, a Latin father is typically, I guess the conceit, the cliche would be that he has quite a temper, and he had quite a temper, a fiery temper for certain. So, I had the cliched experience with my father at 15 when we basically had to almost fight.
Yeah.
And he had to change his disciplinary methods because at that point I could take him.
Yeah.
So I use all of this as, I don't know, I feel like trauma like that can either kind of keep you down, or you can use it as a superpower. And for me, it helps my acting a great deal. For me, it's very easy to conjure tears as an actor, and it's not even conjuring. I just have to think about something that's actually occurred to me, and which is a bit method, I know, but it works for me. And the pain that I dredge up, I feel like makes me a better person, makes me a better father, makes me more empathetic, makes me very fiercely protect those that I love.
It's good that you take something that was bad and turn it into something.
Indeed. I mean, I don't know that it was, I have no doubt that my father was raised more intensely than I was.
Yeah.
And my mother wishes she'd not made the decisions she made, but she was in her mid-20s, and, I don't fully forgive her. I do forgive her, but I think there's a part of me that still, as a parent now, I understand what it is to be a parent. And the only way you could take my son from me is if you kill me.
Yeah.
And good luck.
Yeah. All right. So is there any character that you've played that has resonated with you in that sense?
Absolutely. Dabi, aka Toya Todoroki from My Hero Academia, was very famously abandoned by his father and left for dead. And that the abandonment is strong with this one. So immediately I understood him in a way that maybe I didn't understand every one of my characters. But sometimes you have to pull from your emotional depth in order to kind of make a facsimile of what's actually happening with the character. But in this instance, our experiences were so much the same that wasn't necessary. It wasn't like I was taking the emotions from one sort of situation and putting them on another, and then if you watch, you're like, oh, he's feeling that. No, actually, I'm remembering something entirely different, but it certainly looks like it fits. In that instance, it was very much the same thing. I very much understood his abandonment issues. And frankly, the fans of that particular character, he's become an oddly comforting character to many. I call them the injured bird contingency of my fandom. I get people who have been given up by their parents. I get people who've been abused by their parents, who relate to this character because of his experiences. And when I meet them, I try to explain to them that the reason that I relate is not dissimilar from theirs. And that seems to also be a comfort, much in the way that, people like that I have some Latino heritage because they feel like they're represented. They've got representation for who they are. And it works that way for emotional things as well. If someone feels abandoned or they feel that they've been let down by the people who made them and put them on this plane of existence, and I feel that way too, and my character feels that way, then again, they have that representation. They're not alone.
And how, because when you're voice acting, you don't have the purpose of showing your voice or your emotions through your face. How do you make sure that those emotions that you're feeling come through in your voice?
Well, for me, it's about, and I'll answer this in the way that I answer. Often we get the question of how do I become, as this has gotten more popular, the notion of voice acting as a career choice has become a much more popular wish for many, and an ideal dream, and what I try to explain to them is that when you have your full body, everything at your disposal to communicate the emotional truth as an actor, as a character, because that's what you're going for ultimately, is an emotional truth that people can relate to, right? So, stands to reason when you voice act, so full body, all your weapons. When you voice act, one of those weapons solely, just one of them. And so to communicate that same emotional truth with that same depth requires even more poignant of a skill set, if that makes any sense. And that's the idea. The idea is if I communicate the truth as I know it, as best I can, then it's not going to hit everyone, but hopefully the majority who watch it will feel and see that emotional truth.
So also when you are recording, there's a lot of physicality involved, because if you see the behind the scenes videos of voice actors, they're all over the place. What has been the most challenging role in that aspect, or how do you approach the physicality?
It's interesting because I am a pretty physical person, and I did, the theater I was involved with was often on, I'd say, borderline performance art. And also very emotional. So you're right. I mean, it's not always. I haven't broken a microphone, but I've distinctly knocked a whole rig off. When it comes to something like battle, something that you're feeling emotionally invested in, and you feel very strongly about, it can be difficult. But you kind of have to remind yourself. I mean, that's where being a professional comes in. These microphones are not cheap.
No.
And you can't be punching them. So it's just that, you have to find a balance. You have to be able to communicate that and get that intent without really going for it.
Yeah, and you've also, you've done both video games and anime. What's the difference between the two, and how do you approach these different kinds of roles?
I mean, honestly, for me, they are different mediums. That is for certain. There are certain constraints that are involved in dubbing anime that are not necessarily involved in dubbing a lot of the video game stuff, especially these almost filmic interludes in the midst of games, these cutscenes. I've done, the full body performance capture, and that's a different thing entirely. You're wearing the suits with all of the little balls on it so that the camera can pick up your movements and they can animate on top of that. That's a little bit different. When you're dubbing for an anime, you've got the constraints of the character's actual physical speaking. So when the character opens their mouth, when they move their mouth to show the different syllables of the words they're saying, despite the fact that it was written for another language. And oddly enough, the Japanese don't care about matching the voice flaps, the mouth flaps, but we do. Like in the West, our conceit is that these voices are distinctly coming out of these characters. So for us, especially dubbing it into English, you know, it changes the rhythm of your speech. It changes how long it takes for you to say something. It changes sometimes how you can stress certain words at certain points because the character opens their mouth in a different way or in a bigger way. It's an entirely different game, whereas most of the cutscenes in a video game, typically they animate to your performance. So then you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. So, I don't know, dubbing is a bit more like acting Olympics in that, you know, you've got to jump through some hoops. You've got to hit the target a little bit more precisely, which does make it harder to improvise or come up with things off the cuff. But it happens. I mean, still, once you've gotten to know a character, I mean, I've played certain characters for 10 years, and you know a character pretty well when you've played a character for 10 years. When you've played a character for 10 years, it doesn't matter if it's in person or if it's just recording, that character's a part of you and you are a part of that character, right? So they occupy a facet of your brain, of your personality, you know, there's a lot of you in that character and vice versa. So it becomes more possible to improvise, I guess, in that respect. And even with the constraints of the length of the line, the meter of the speech, but it's more challenging, that's for certain.
And do you watch the original version?
When we're dubbing, we do. We'll do a pass where we watch it in Japanese because we do want to get what that intent is like. But by virtue of the fact, like I was explaining my panel earlier, Japanese does not translate directly to any of the Romance languages, nor culturally do certain concepts make as much sense. Japanese concepts don't necessarily make sense here in the West, and vice versa, right? So, like I was asked a question about sub versus dub. How do I feel about that debate? I personally feel like that shouldn't be a debate at all because they are distinctly different things. I mean, they're almost entirely different pieces of art, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, because of the nature of that. The translation process. They don't translate directly. The concepts don't translate directly. And we want things to be relatable in the West. And even going from English to Dutch or Dutch to English, that's going to be more relatable. I mean, you know, the States came from Europe, essentially. So our concepts are much closer. There are still some things that they aren't quite the same thing. But for the most part, we're going to have more commonality than, say, if we translated from Russian or Japanese.
Well, I got a sign that this is all the time that we have today. So
no worries.
Thank you so much.
I hope you guys got what you wanted. I know
I'm very interested.
You tend to get a different kind of interview with me because I'm an old man and I've been doing this a long time. So.
No, I like it when people keep talking because.
Well, no problem here.
Oh wow, cool.